Hello, everyone. So good to be here with you again this week. It's been a long time since I've been hosting one of these, so I'm pretty darn excited. I'm Dr. Pamela Crisco. I am one of the founding board members of the Psychedelic Association of Canada, and I'm honored to be here with our guests today. I would first like to acknowledge that I come to you. I get to live, work, and play on the traditional unceded territory of the Klahoos First Nations, the Homolko First Nations, and the Tla'amin First Nations. And I feel really honored that this is where I get to be with you guys today. I also want to put a big call out to all of the Canadians watching this today that we launched last week, not even a few days ago, e-petition, the federal e-petition 4334. And we really, really want to get to 500,000 signatures on this petition. So if you haven't already signed it, Cheryl's going to put the link in the chat. If you haven't already signed it, please do. And please amplify it out to all Canadians you know. Get it shared out there. Let's tell our elected MPs that if people have the right to MAID, they surely have the right to have psilocybin before they have medical access, medical assistance in death, in dying. So please click on that link, go to the petition, sign it. If you have a few extra dollars in your pocket that you can donate to the Psychedelic Association of Canada so we can amplify that in ads and stuff, we'd really appreciate that as well. And I want to thank Cheryl, our wonderful chief of staff at the Psychedelic Association, for getting this all organized for us, and all the amazing volunteers at the Psychedelic Association of Canada. Thank you for all you do. This is like a 99.9% volunteer organization. So everything we do is all volunteers. So happy to be here. So we have got our friends, allies, and colleagues from the US joining us today. The American Revolution, what is happening in psychedelic legalization, decriminalization across the border. And so what we're going to do, we're going to jump right in. We've got Tatiana Luz from Washington State, Greg Shankin from Colorado State, and Piper Lucas from Oregon State. And so what we're going to start out with is we'll go in that order, Tatiana, Greg, and then Piper. If you guys could all introduce yourself to our audience, please.
Thank you so much for having me here today. So yes, my name is Tatiana Luz, and I live in the unceded territories of the Duwamish and Coast Salish peoples in Seattle, Washington. Let's see, I think I'll just start with like some of the things that I do with advocacy. So I got my start with Decriminalize Nature Seattle in late July of 2020. And that was quite a psychedelic experience, just going through this whole arc with the group at the time. And we had some norming and storming and all these things happen. But by the time about a year later after that I joined, we started to really be able to refocus our team. And for a grueling 8 months, we were able to organize, get people to come to city council meetings, and we were able to pass a resolution in Seattle decriminalizing psychedelics in October of 2021. And then shortly thereafter, I helped to found the Psychedelic Medicine Alliance of Washington. And so I'm a co-director there, and we are a small team, but we're really effective. And right now we're helping to steward Senate Bill 5263. It's currently, I believe it's in the House now. It got voted out of the Senate. It's not quite where we would like it to be, but in terms of the contents of the bill, but it's a marathon when it comes to working in the legislature. And so we're just working to try to pass things in a progressive way, and it's going to take steps. And in addition to that, I also organize community events through Cascadia Psychedelic Community here in our region.
Awesome. I'll go next. Yeah, my name is Greg Shankin from Boulder, Colorado, and so happy to be here. So thanks for inviting me on. I was an ambassador for the Natural Medicine Health Act, or also known as Prop 122 in the state of Colorado, which passed in November by a whopping 53.5%, which in the United States constitutes a landslide, and 190,000 more yes votes than no. I became involved in the bill last summer and really just dove in, worked closely with the team, grassroots efforts, get out the vote efforts, sent 19,000 text messages out through a platform where you just got to go like this and then answer lots of questions and answer lots of expletives of people who were against the bill. But overall, super positive experience. And obviously we passed the legislation. So that's wonderful. And we'll all talk more about where we are in that process. But I became involved in this whole journey, starting, which I'll probably talk more about later on this call, through my own psychedelic healing journey, which is only 14 months old. So kind of like when you say a baby's 14 months, I'm a psychedelic baby. However, when I came back from my first experience, I really just kind of dove all in, devouring everything I could. I just really became enamored with my own journey. And then that just led into advocacy efforts. I had never been involved in advocacy. I'm a good citizen. I pay attention, but just really was an honor and a privilege to be a part of actual legislation so close to when the bill was on the ballot, and then seeing it pass and being a small part of it. And I also serve in some other areas, co-founder of the Psychedelic Business Association, which Piper founded, and she'll talk more about that. And I'm on the leadership team of the Colorado Psychedelic Society. Interestingly enough, although these societies exist all over the world, one did not exist in Colorado until right after the bill. So a good friend of mine founded it, and I'm on the leadership team there. And I'm on the leadership team of another nonprofit called Empathic Health, which is a psychedelic healing community. And so these are some of the ways I'm serving, and I'm just really privileged to be at the age of 54, really finding like I found my passion and living my truth and serving this ecosystem. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Greg. My name is Piper Lucas, and I come from the territories of the Wasco and the Warm Springs and the Klamath and the Modoc tribes. Grateful to be here in Central Oregon. And super grateful to be asked to come and share what I know about Oregon. I am by no means an expert, but I have learned a lot in the last couple of years. And I started to get involved. My background is in architecture, and I got involved about a year ago during our rulemaking process by going to the development department and asking people, all the people I work with, submitting plans like, hey, what about these psilocybin service centers? And they were like, what? Like psilocybin. And so I quickly realized that the lawmakers and the people making decisions have no idea what this medicine is. And my medicine path has been about 16 years long, and mostly in the indigenous route that's come into my life. And I'm super grateful for the medicines as they have traveled into my life and into my community. And I just want that medicine to be brought in the best way possible as it is converging with the Western world, to honor where these medicines have come from, and also try the best we can to bring the indigenous wisdom into the Western clinical world. Here in Oregon, I ran the campaign in our county, which I'll talk about later. We had an opt-out full session go on, and so I had to win in our county a second time. And we started the Psychedelic Business Association. So Greg and Elaine, one other founder with us. And that is basically a brainchild of realizing that all of these businesses were kind of separately wanting and needing different things. And there wasn't really a good advocacy. We do have Healing Advocacy Fund, which is great. And there was a need for the business community to kind of have their voices known, and also be able to communicate with each other as we are rolling this program out with facilitators and manufacturers and service centers. Like all of those different license types needed a platform through which to communicate. So not to mention insurance and banking and on all of those things that businesses need. So that's how this came about. And it's kind of, you guys as the PAC in Canada are ahead of us, and we are looking to you as a model, because you're doing great work. Thanks for having me.
That's sweet. Thanks for all that, you guys. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have each of our guests take us through where they started in their state and where they're at now. And so why don't I'll just keep rotating through you guys with somebody starting each time differently. So Greg, if you're ready, can you start? Greg, you'll start, and then we'll go to Piper, and then we'll go to Tatiana. So where you started and where you are now with your campaign.
Sure. So I'll pull up some slides just as visual context. I generally don't like to read slides, so I'll just kind of chat. And so what preceded the bill, Natural Medicine Health Act, Prop 122 in the state of Colorado, was the Decrim bill in the city of Denver, which is the largest city in Colorado, in 2019. And the same person, Kevin Matthews, really was the bull behind both of these, coalition director. And so he successfully saw the Decrim bill pass in Denver, and that was a landmark bill, and that just set the stage for what we were able to do last year. And so I'll just walk through some of the primary pieces of this bill, and that will kind of serve to answer your question, where we are, where we're headed. So there's really two pieces, two tracks. And the first is, I'll start with the one which we call personal use. So it removes criminal penalties for the personal use of natural medicines. And we also, what I'm really proud of in this bill, even though I didn't help craft it, but obviously I've been a part of it, is that it really has taken, in my opinion, a very comprehensive view of where we need to be. So not just removing criminal penalties for moving forward, but also looking at people who have negative blemishes on their record, or really just things that grow out of the ground. And so that's another piece here. So if you've been convicted and you've been released, it actually doesn't cover you if you are currently incarcerated, but if you've been released, that can now be removed from your bill. And I'll get into some more specifics here, but the other main piece is what is called the Regulated Access Program. And so, kind of dry text here, but creates licensing and a regulatory framework here. So the Regulated Access Program, it creates licensing and regulatory framework for those who can safely benefit from using psychedelic therapies. And so that one is a little trickier because it involves regulatory agencies. And the one that we need to work with in the state of Colorado is called DORA. And here we go. So, but this is really what drives everything. No one deserves to be prosecuted for trying to heal. I mean, that's really what this is all about. And I think I'm probably preaching to the choir to everyone listening here. That's really the driver for all this. We know these medicines are powerful in healing, and that's why we've covered both personal use and regulated access, because nobody deserves to be prosecuted for trying to heal. So what that includes is, on the personal use side, adults 21 and over can obtain, grow, gift, process, store, use, transport, and ingest natural medicine. And natural medicine, as it is defined right now, includes psilocybin, psilocin, ibogaine, DMT, and mescaline, not including peyote. And I'll explain why peyote is not included. So that's very straightforward. And literally, as soon as the governor's pen ratified the bill, I believe at the end of December, that became law. It's landmark legislation because there is now provision for personal use of natural medicines. So really exciting. The Regulated Access Program will take a bit longer to roll out. Oregon is a couple of years ahead of us, and Piper will talk about that. And so DORA is the agency that will lay down the groundwork, guidelines, guardrails, et cetera, that will allow licensed healing centers to administer psilocybin. DORA, the government agency, will be complemented by the Natural Medicine Advisory Board. So the governor has recently appointed 15 members of that board, different disciplines, and those two bodies will work together to make that happen. And so this will lay down those guardrails and regulations, as I said. And the initial healing centers will just be for psilocybin and psilocin, whereas the personal use covers the other natural medicines, DMT, ibogaine, and mescaline, not including peyote. And this will occur ideally before, the deadline is June 1st, 2026 to add the other natural medicines to this bill. And as mentioned, these will all be permitted at licensed healing centers. But one piece that was carved out of this bill that was a little bit different than Oregon, and whenever I mention anything that Colorado is doing differently than Oregon, it's with the utmost of respect towards Oregon, because they were the first. They made mistakes, and guess what? We are the second, and we will make mistakes, and so will the third, fourth, and fifth, just like the cannabis space went. But the point is that we're pushing legislation forward and we're learning. And so one piece of the treatment center model is that it won't necessarily just have to be one-on-one with a therapist in a physical healing center. It can also be group sessions. It can also be nature ceremonial sessions. So that's one piece of this regulated access program that provides a bit more flexibility and is more aligned with the types of healing modalities that many of us here have experienced and believe in. A couple things that it doesn't allow. This is not quote unquote cannabis 2.0, meaning that there are no provisions for retail sales. There will be no psilocybin dispensaries, access to minors. I mentioned before, use of peyote is carved out of this bill, and that's out of respect to the indigenous tribes at their request. So I wasn't part of these discussions, but people behind the bill were. And although mescaline is included as a natural medicine, peyote is not. And again, I think that just speaks to the respect that people who crafted this bill were thinking about when they did so. Also, kind of some common sense stuff: no use of natural medicine on federal properties, use within business promotions, driving, public spaces, schools. And also, there's no requirement that employers must allow natural medicines in the workplace. So you can't be forced to include that in your workplace. And so in September 2024, during the advisory board will roll out this program, which will cover these various constituencies and audiences within the entire space here, to allow for this to roll out in the regulated model. Here's a bit of a rollout schedule here, and that kind of covers where we are. And I can, so far, it's like anything, there's, as some of these things have rolled out, there are conflicts and controversies that are already happening, but we will deal with them. And so the main thing is we push this legislation through, and I can certainly speak to more of that at other points in this call, but that's where we are. It's super exciting, and we're excited about where we're headed.
Thanks, Greg. Over to you, Piper.
All right, I'm gonna try to share my screen here. Okay.
Yeah, we can see it.
Just trying to get into presentation mode. There we go. Okay, so psilocybin in Oregon, where we are. So the timeline, it was interesting to chat with Pam ahead of time and know that she was involved in helping us get legal, and knew Cherie and Tom Eckert. And part of this, Pam, you could probably add some more stuff that I don't know, because I didn't get involved until 2019, but we had to do an initial proposal and got enough signatures and got that going. And then in 2020, we voted for Measure 109 and Measure 110, which I included here. Measure 109 establishes regulated psilocybin therapy system to be supervised, licensed facilities in Oregon. Measure 110 is basically a decriminalization and personal use with thresholds. So I wouldn't go to say it's anywhere near decrim nature, but more of the intent of that measure was to eliminate folks with small amounts of substances to go onto jail. And you can see here, we passed it by 55%, which is a huge number. This is kind of my opinion, how we passed. It's not a medical model. And it's also not therapy, counseling, or social work. And the reason I think this makes a big difference is now we're starting to rub. We have a little bit of friction with those agencies. So I think just avoiding them altogether and not calling it therapy and not calling it medical helped it pass. We also here, we have a very polarized state, really conservative and extremely liberal. So I think that's another reason that allowed it to pass, is that in the original measure, certain counties could opt out of offering these services. So the more conservative counties felt comfortable about letting it pass because those hippies and the liberal cities can do it, but they didn't have to in their more rural, generally rural and conservative counties. We used a lot of data and the veterans and personal heartfelt stories that sort of cross the divide in all ways. And Healing Advocacy Fund, again, did a great job of just grassroots efforts, phone banking, old school, and it worked. The 55% says a lot. So I just wanted to add this in as like, these are lessons learned, and it's so great that Colorado has learned 95% of what to do, what not to do. And so Colorado did not offer an opt-out because I believe Colorado is very similar to Oregon in that it's polarized with conservative and more liberal folks. And what ended up happening in Oregon is that the conservative counties opted out. And I think that the way they wrote the measure was that they were hoping it would sort of slip into these counties, but what they didn't account for was the Oregon League of Cities. And to be honest, I'm really not sure what they do, except they're a planning mechanism department. And they wrote a letter to all of the development departments in early 2022 and said, hey, this thing is coming up, and here's some suggested language for you to opt out. And so they basically suggested all counties in Oregon opt out of offering these services by providing language. No one knew this was going to happen, and no one saw that they would have an opinion. So that was a big surprise. And what it forced us to do is run campaigns, which actually there were only two counties, mine, Deschutes County and Jackson counties, that ran campaigns, active campaigns. The other counties didn't have advocates. So that was a big lesson learned for Washington, you know, like maybe you don't want to do that. And for you guys in Canada, just be aware that you need advocates to really push for this, or just do it as a whole nation, just allow things to become legal. And you can kind of see cities in there, but basically those are the areas where we're allowing psilocybin. The timeline was a bummer. We learned a lot. And again, I'm grateful that Colorado learned from this. It sounds like you guys are going to have a good 6 months from when implementation happens, like when the laws are done and codified, and then implementation. So why we haven't started offering services yet is that it was 5 days difference. And so as we were running the campaign in Deschutes, the planning directors just dragged their heels and said, we don't have the laws yet. We're not going to allow it in our county because we don't have the laws. So it was sort of used as an excuse for counties to opt out. And also there's additional confusion in that a new Senate Bill 303 just came out days after the OHA, Oregon Health Authority, figured out all of the rules, adding the more data collection. So it was a little glitchy. I think that more information about the data collection would have been liked by definitely by the business community and by the democratic process. And we all need data collection because it helps elections get passed. So just some issues that are coming up now. And why we don't have services yet. So as we all know, well, maybe we don't all know, manufacturing the product can take 6 weeks to 2 months. And Oregon Health Authority is understaffed. I think they would say that they don't have a lot of people to go through all of these licenses. So it is taking the full 2 to 3 months for them to approve licenses. And then on top of that, you have the growing time. The facilitator school, we have to train facilitators, and I'll talk about HEC later, but that could take 3 to 18 months to be trained. And service centers, with my background in architecture, it takes, the city of Bend takes 5 months to get building permits. And not to mention the difficulty of it being a federally illegal substance that you need to own the land outright. So purchasing the land, building, getting permits, all of that really is limiting with how service centers can open. And testing facility, getting the equipment. So here you can see to date the number of licenses that are permitted. And just today or yesterday, I believe they approved the first manufacturer license. So we're at least 6 weeks out from when we will have grown legal medicine. Okay, are we close? There we go. Go back there. Training facilitators, so I just mentioned that. Okay, and lessons learned. So licensing bodies, you know, we're new in this, and we don't really know what licensing bodies to go into. And so we knew that we needed trained facilitators, and we knew we needed facilitator schools, which was Cherie and Tom Eckert's biggest push, was they wanted to be in that realm. And there just wasn't any knowledge that there was this higher education coordinating council that needed to approve any sort of higher education thing, any sort of permit that would come out. And that took an additional, I want to say 2 to 3 months for that to get approved, which held everything up 2 to 3 months, which means facilitators could have been graduating in December and be ready to go, but now it's March and they're just graduating. Also the DLCD, that's our Department of Land Conservation and Development. And they are, in Oregon, we're pretty special. I don't know if Washington, Tatiana, if you know this, but, or Colorado, but we have pretty particular rules about where development can happen. And they are very strict around zoning. And so this organization was kind of forgotten about until August, when all of these counties were deciding whether to opt out or not. They needed a ruling from the state legislation saying you are allowed to grow psilocybin on farmland, you are allowed to have service centers on commercial land and or farmland, or we'll leave it up to the county. So lessons learned, talk to any and all of the licensing bodies, and take into consideration the implementation time for businesses to launch, and local jurisdictions to create their own rules. So my lens is architecture. So each county will probably want to be involved in where they want these services to be offered. That includes traffic impact studies, et cetera. So just giving local counties time to really prepare and think about how these services could impact their communities. This is what got Greg and I activated, is there wasn't like a really codified voice of businesses wanting to open that could relay that information of what they needed to the makers. So there were some meetup groups that founded and coalesced, and we're all still working together. And that would be for Colorado and Washington and Canada, as you guys are moving forward. Use the PAC in Canada, and Colorado and Washington use our business association, or create your own, that you guys are all networking with each other and making sure that all the needs are being heard by your politicians. And God, if we could deschedule, wow, everything would be easier. But that's a wish. And how will we work together? There's so many ways, and it's inspiring to think about, and I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
All right.
Thanks, Piper. Over to you, Tatiana.
Yeah, so I'll just go over briefly a little bit about our strategy. It's a little bit different. We started with a resolution in Seattle, and then another resolution was passed in Port Townsend. And then in, I want to say, late fall of 2021, we caught wind of Senator Solomon, who was interested in essentially recreating 109 for Washington. And so, let's see, I have some slides here, but I'm not going to pop them up. I'll just read them a little bit. So he introduced the bill. It was last year. Pam, I think you testified last year. It was an amazing hearing that we had in the Health and Long-Term Care Committee in February of 2022, or of 2022, yeah. So it got a hearing, but it did not get voted out of committee. And that was essentially the first year of the bill. And at that point, it was very similar to 109 with just a few tweaks. This second time that it was introduced this year, it's still, the bill is still alive, but it's not in the same form as it was introduced. So some of the things that were changed, some of the lessons that we did learn from Oregon and some things that we picked up from Colorado as well, was to try and remove the opt-out provision, but also to allow the state to subsidize the cost of regulating the program. So not having the expectation that licensure fees were going to cover everything. I think that piece, we kind of saw it like pretty much any other healthcare program that's supported by the state is subsidized to some degree. So why wouldn't this as well be subsidized to some degree? We also picked up from what Colorado did with creating more flexibility with what a service center looks like or could be, including outdoor spaces and things like this. We added provisions to protect you from losing your licensure for employment or participating in these services, so that you can't lose your job for taking psilocybin in a service center. And then we added something called like micro-tier licensure. So this is aimed at providing access for small businesses to operate, because we all know that licensure just in general and frameworks like this in general are just inherently expensive because of all of the hoop jumping they have to go through because they are federally scheduled substances. Let's see. And one piece that's different about Washington is that, unfortunately, this bill didn't include decriminalization provisions. So the current state of the bill, basically what I learned along in the process is that when you're going the legislative route, even one legislator can undo all of your work. And so that's what happened, is that at the last minute, leaving one of the committees before it was being put up to an executive committee vote, a senator decided to X out everything in our bill and turn it into a research bill. And so that happened in the Senate. And since then, it's been like slowly morphing its way into something that has a bit more teeth. We don't know what that's going to look like just yet because it's still changing. Senator Solomon is still offering amendments. Some of the ideas behind this would be something like a pilot project, which would allow people to basically be results and inform the legislature about this. So I think that's better than just a research bill, because that's essentially what got passed last year, which was a study this, safety, advocacy, this kind of thing bill. And so we're hoping that whatever does get passed this year will do two things. It will continue to inform the legislature that this is a good idea and that it is safe and that it is something that we should do for Washington, while also not getting in the way of us reintroducing the bill in the future with the hopes of passing it. And we had tremendous support going in. We had more than half, or no, just a little under half of all the senators co-sponsoring the bill. I think we had like 22 or 23 senators co-sponsoring the bill. And we had Republicans and Democrats. So there was bipartisan support, but there's a lot of lawmakers and not all of them had heard about the issue. And we spent the entire fall, me and Cody, talking to so many lawmakers, but there's so many more that we didn't reach. And so I think lessons learned would be like, we need more people who can do this with us to do outreach. We only have, we have 2 public affairs consultants, and we just need more help, you know, to reach these lawmakers and educate them about the bill. And I think if we can get what's going to get passed this year, if something gets passed, out of the way for next year, we could have a really strong chance of being the first state to pass something legislatively.
Thanks. And I think there's a couple points there that you all have made, and I'll just highlight them. Is that one thing I noticed, having testified many times, is that it's a lot of people don't actually know what these are. They don't know that they're medicines, and the power of education is so powerful. Piper probably remembers this from Oregon. In the pre-polling times, there was just a little bit of education raised the numbers of people who were going to support the bill. A lot of people don't know what these words mean. What does psilocybin mean? And if you say something like, do you realize that, you know, after, you know, one session of psilocybin, many smokers quit smoking, or many alcoholics resolve that issue? It's a little bit of education based on science goes a long ways. And if people don't even care about people, at least tell them how much money will be saved. Because I know in our program in Canada with Roots to Thrive, for every one person that goes through our psychedelic assisted therapy program, the healthcare system saves $30,000. So that's a lot of money. So a little bit of education goes a long ways, a lot here. What I want to do now is, so thanks for bringing that up. And if people have questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. I'm happy to ask them. But what I really want to go to is, some of you already commented on this, so just you get to comment on it again, is what went easier, or what surprised you of this? Like, what is something you'd want to highlight about what you've seen, whether it was a process or anything? Like, what was a surprise win or a surprise much easier?
I can share something that was a surprise, not a win, but a learning, which is that we think of ourselves as this cohesive psychedelic family, and in many ways we are, because we believe in this work and we believe in the medicine and the healing potential. But yet there are still factions. We discovered factions within this psychedelic family that were very much against this bill in Colorado. And so for various reasons, some of them are more on the Decrim side, so they don't want any regulations at all around legalization. And in fact, some of them even had, you know, vote no posters on their websites that could be printed out. I mean, people that were actively against the bill. I'm not sitting in judgment. I'm just stating that that was a surprise, and anyone getting involved in legislation, that could happen in your town. So that was a surprise. I'm happy to say that some of those folks and organizations have now come around and are now supportive now that the bill has passed. And just my personal feeling there was, just like I said before, none of this legislation is perfect. I love hearing about what you're doing in Washington, Tatiana, because it sounds like you're iterating from what we've done, and we've iterated from Oregon, and that's amazing. And so, you know, one of the against folks said, you know, we need more time. We need more time to, you know, craft a better bill. But this was about a month before the election. Like, the time is now. The time is now. And so while we all recognize that this legislation is not perfect, we passed the bill, and now we can move from there. So I'd say that's something that was a surprise, and I think something to be aware of as we all move forward together on this.
Something that I thought would be harder would be finding our sponsors, essentially, like legislatively. When we went to city council, we found Andrew Lewis, you know, We've heard about the mayor in Olympia, so we're going to pursue decriminalization in Olympia. And we've heard about a council member in Bellingham. And we know that Spokane, for example, we want to get some folks on the east side as well. There was a campaign in Spokane, but I think it fizzled out after a while. But we want to have a grassroots and up approach in Washington, because some of the lessons that were learned from Oregon is like, hey, there's like all these red counties where there's a severe lack of education, but there are people out there who are eating mushrooms, who are using psychedelics, who, if we can get in contact with them, they can start they can hold a town hall and invite law enforcement and fire department and all these other people that are in the community that people respect, and hold conversations and just organize this. And you just need a few nodes, you don't have to cover every county necessarily, but you just need a few nodes, and that can make a really big difference. And so that's the approach that we're trying to do through PMAW, is to support our advocates across the state to hold conversations. And you'll find your sponsors, they're out there. Some of them are still in the closet, especially in red areas, because it's still a fraught topic, it's still got a lot of stigma attached to it.
Yeah, that's awesome, Tatiana. Definitely, I would say go along that path because it worked for us. What is surprising me is that this industry is rolling out extremely collaboratively. Everybody is trying to help each other out, sharing business plans, sharing legal advice and expensive things. And it's so beautiful to watch. And the ones who aren't are not, they're not a part of the conversation as much, and they're also missing out of some of the opportunities that are happening between all of us. So that has been a lovely surprise, the collaboration. Another surprise is the cost. Tatiana, I'm also really glad to hear that your state has decided to subsidize it, because wow, we have, I think, 134 million. No, I'm not remembering that. A lot of money for Measure 110, to implement 110 for recovery, basically for drug addiction. And no money was set aside for 109. So all of the license types are having to foot that bill, and it's not enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've all seen in the news that some pretty big international players have gone bankrupt just in the last 2 weeks. And so I think that's a part of that. And I'm really happy to hear that Washington addressed it. Yeah, and I mentioned it earlier, another surprise was that the counties, this unknown kind of organization, the Oregon League of Cities, just wrote this white paper to all the county development directors, giving them opt-out language. Like, I don't think anyone expected that. So the more that we can talk to our different jurisdictions and people making the rules to kind of see who's out there and if they have strong opinions, and get them educated. Education is a big.
Yeah, that aligns with what you said, Piper and Tatiana, around allies and stuff, and Greg too, is what really surprised us in Canada. Like when we went for Vancouver decriminalization, it kind of came out of a city councilor trying to do something the exact opposite, and the community rallied. Everyone, like hundreds of people, showed up at City Hall to testify, and then right after, the councilors were like, let's sit down with you guys and write the legislation. And it totally changed. And when we lobbied in Ottawa, which is our federal government, we met with all parties, and surprisingly, it was in Canada, the Conservative Party is more like the red, like Republican. They were all in. Like, they were like, yeah, I've watched Fantastic Fungi. I know about psilocybin. Yes, I support. So like, it really surprised me, because I really expected the more progressive parties to be way more in favor. And yet those ones seem to be a little more on the conservative side. And I think sometimes the party in power is not where you're going to get your allies. It's the party that wants to be in power, because now they've got something to rally about. So I was really, really surprised. And what I was actually even more happily surprised. I love it when your belief system gets changed, like you're totally wrong. It was the most like the senators, like that's our second house in Canada is the senators, and they were all in. They were like, yeah, because they were old enough to have experienced psychedelics before they were illegal.
Mhm.
And so they were like, well, of course, we've been waiting, And so don't limit yourself on who you think your allies are. Talk to everyone, because you just don't know who actually is going to be an easy win on that. So that was one thing. So what was harder? What did you think would be a breeze, but was much harder? And thinking like there's people out there watching that are going to be doing this or are doing this. Like I think there's 22 states looking at this right now in the US. So what was harder, and what advice would you give around that?
Yeah, I think this speaks to kind of the theme that we're talking about here, which is forming allies. And I think what was harder, but I think where we see the solution, and I think many of us are aware of this, is the power of storytelling. So you mentioned before, Pam, about education and mentioning some stats, and I did not make up this term, but someone said to me recently, and it really resonated. Statistics moves, or data moves science, but story moves culture. And so actually Kevin was telling me how he met with the Denver DA. I think this was during the 2019 Decrim bill, and she was very again, she was just uneducated and didn't understand what he was talking about. And he showed her a video of a veteran who had healed through psychedelic healing. It was a 1 minute long video, and he just saw her eyes. He saw the switch. I'm probably answering your question the opposite way, which is something that makes things easier, but maybe just also kind of setting the tone of what can pave the way when we run into resistance with folks who may not be educated. And I really do think it's the combination of the data, whether it's how much money you can save with your healthcare system, or these are the stats and graphs, absolutely, but then also the power of storytelling. So those two combined is what we really honed in on here in a lot of our efforts.
I guess I can jump in. What was harder? It's what's present in my mind right now, because I'm actually in a facilitator training school presently, and something that I don't think anyone thought of is there needs to be practicum hours. Which totally makes sense. You think about Indigenous cultures, you have a mentor or a teacher, and you sit with them for years before they approve you to go and sit on your own with a client. And our schools have 40 practicum hours, and the way that it's written is you need a licensed facilitator to sit with psilocybin. And so these first cohorts coming out of the facilitator schools don't have licensed facilitators. So that is something that's really interesting, that we're all sort of having to grapple with, of these practicum hours in altered states, that breath work, yeah, okay, and ketamine is legal, but it's not working directly with the medicine. So that, I think that's another thing that no one really thought through, the details, and that for sure is something, as Colorado and Washington move forward, that I bet you guys are going to get smarter on that. Yeah, I'll leave it up to Tatiana. There's more, but that's great for now.
I would say what's been harder has been navigating the legislative route and the amount of compromise that's required. Patience and compromise to go this route. It's really a marathon. It's not like a ballot measure where you can craft this thing and do the best that you can with it. And then as long as you run a solid campaign and you have the money and you can get the votes, you could win. And if you have a state that, supports the citizens initiative, then you could actually change the laws directly. But through the legislature, there's been an incredible amount of compromise, and keeping my optimism has been challenging at times, because what I didn't anticipate was that I thought, okay, you have a bill, it's going to go through iterations of edits and whatnot, but it gets voted on, like edits get added and it gets voted on. But actually what can happen is like a senator or whoever can just decide, like, we don't like this, here's a new bill. And that's what happened to us this year. And we're working with this now. And so, yeah, I had no idea that that's like the reality that could happen. And so I would say, and we did everything right. Like we had all the co-sponsors. I mean, you know, we did as much as we could in terms of educational outreach. So I would say that just like understanding that if you're going to go the legislative route, which is much more affordable, but it's a longer term process, is that it's going to be done in chunks and pieces. And it's not going to look like how you want it for a long time, probably. And there's a lot less control. So like, that's really challenging for me as an advocate, and for someone who like has experienced and knows how safe these substances can be with the right setting, you know, held with integrity and with intention. Like, it's just really hard to have to compromise so much.
I'll jump in and add one more thing, if that's okay. And that is that, and I think it kind of echoes off what you said, Tatiana. You spend so much time crafting language and communicating and clearly communicating. And then you hear from the opposition, oh, this is just a big money grab. When in fact, it's not. The way our bill was crafted, and I think Oregon is the same, you know, no entity or individual can own more than 5 healing centers. So there will not be, you know, a Walmart of healing centers here. It says it right in the bill. And then people say, well, people can set up shell companies, people can do this, and people, yes, I mean, there's always a way around regulations and rules, but the way this bill was crafted is not designed to be a money grab, and we worked very hard to do that. And yet you still have people, you know, you're saying, Tatiana, in your case, it's legislators. In our case, I think we had that too, but also citizens, and some of whom are, as I mentioned before, are, you know, what we call in our family. So I think that is definitely something that stood out for me as we went along through the campaign as being harder than we had hoped.
Any other? Harder than thought?
Besides all that, it was easy.
Other than that, you know, it's one of these things that you bring up, Greg, that I think is really important for listeners. Is there's kind of this on anything that's cutting edge, leading edge, making change. There's kind of 2 type of people in it. I feel like there's people, the idea people, the people that what's possible. Let's do it. Let's make this world better. Like the idea thinker, the big thinkers, like, and then there are the people that tear it down. And I invite those people to become idea people, to become solution makers. If you don't like it, suggest another option. Mm-hmm. Instead of tear it down, just say, hey, what about this? Instead of like, it's a money grab, saying, hey, how can we make it so small people can get in? You know, like, bring your ideas. It's lazy to say what is not right or not perfect. That's lazy. Anyone can do that. And what we need in this world is much more inspiration, much more courage. Like, be courageous enough to put an idea out there. That's courage. Like, that's what we need, is that kind of leadership. And I invite people that are listening to do that. This is what we need. We don't need any of the naysayers. We need the thinkers. We need the big thinkers, the idea people. So.
Yeah, that's so beautifully said. And I think when the naysayers come in and just make this broad sweep, it's a money grab. I mean, there's just no nuance in that kind of a statement. You know, ask a question. Let's talk about why you think it's a money grab. Let's look at the bill together, literally, and see why you think that and how maybe you have some great points. But yeah, when it's just a big, broad, then that kind of shuts down the dialogue. And that's not what we want. We want to build dialogue, as you pointed out.
Yeah. And one other thing with that is, one of our wise elder mentors, one of our First Nation mentors, you know, kind of laughs at this Western way of being, you're doing it wrong. It's so colonized, and we're talking about decolonizing and re-indigenizing ourselves in these medicines and coming back to who we are. And instead, if we were really, truly back at our foundations, we'd be curious. It's a curiosity. Help me understand that, as opposed to you're wrong. You're wrong is so colonized, and help me understand is much more curious and much more in line with, I think, really what psychedelics stand for and why we're so interested in them.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a beautiful point, Pam, that would be a surprise. Is in our county, we didn't go to the sheriff and include him in the conversation, and it was almost like he was personally offended and just came out against it because of lack of education. Whereas if people can stay curious and purposefully go out to the opposing people, people that you think might be against it, and start asking questions in an empathic way and truly wanting to know the answers, there's probably a solution. There's probably some good ideas.
I think some of this, like what you just said, Piper, like, yeah, going to folks who you may not think to include, and open sourcing your process a little bit and asking for feedback and doing the education. Yeah, because if I recall correctly, the original measure in Colorado didn't include Decrim, and then there was a lot of like turmoil over that I witnessed from afar. And then it got incorporated eventually, and it passed. And so like, yeah, like thinking about like how we can create more access for people to provide input, and then being like, what's realistic, like what can actually pass. Like we have our like high goals, and then like what's actually feasible. And
That's
you'll
right.
find out through polling, through talking to people in the community, like what do people really support, what are they afraid of. I think that can really help titrate some of the like, oh, anything's possible, because it's not true. Like it can be possible over time, but like right now, what can we achieve? And we can achieve more the more open that we are, with with the things that we're working on, essentially.
Yeah, and when you said open, it really was sparking what I wanted to share next, which is the openness. I mean, here we are, and one of the some of the noise that we heard in Colorado was, quote, "There's out-of-state money coming in to support this bill." And when I heard that, it was like, we have our borders, our state borders, our countries, because that's how the world has been formulated over, a long time. But we're all working together here. So like America, Canada, Colorado, money coming in from California, like, come on, let's work together and take the resources we can. And to me, there are borders because there have to be, based on the way government's set up, and borders are drawn, but it's borderless, those of us who are doing this work, because we're trying to bring this to the entire world and to society, where it's been doing so much good for thousands of years in regions of the world, and now we're trying to bring it to the entire world. So to me, there are no borders here at all, except for the ones we have to navigate through, which is the nucleus of a lot of this conversation we're having now with different states and countries, but it's all about making it happen.
So let's get a bit of a call to action out there. So how, for if people are in any of your states or adjacent states, how can they help? So if each of you can jump in, like, what do you need now? What are the skills you need? Anything, like, what is the call? What is the call out to those that can help you?
I can start. In Washington, we need folks for PMAW, we need folks who can help fundraise, so that we can do the outreach work, because it costs money to drive to Eastern Washington and to like rent a venue and all these things. So we definitely need people who can help fundraise. We have our website, pmaw.org. You can find how to contribute to us there financially. We are a registered 501c4. We also need folks who are comfortable just like going out there and sharing their stories, whether that's virtually or in person. folks who want to, like I said, work with their city council, passing resolutions across the state. And then I'm also part of a coalition called REACH. It's the Responsible Entheogen Access and Community Healing Initiative. And we're hoping to pass a ballot measure in the next couple of years. It's going to be a slower process because we're completely grassroots. But we want to partner and do the same exact thing. So like my hope is that by being part of PMAW and REACH, that we can work together to create like a statewide approach from the grassroots up to educate our communities and then get the support that we need to pass a ballot measure in the next like 2 years, hopefully, is our goal. So that's basically the kind of support we're looking for, is people to tell their stories, people to come out to events, and for folks who can contribute monetarily to please do so and help us fundraise.
And I'll just put a little plug out there for you, Tatiana. Nikian.org, a Canadian nonprofit, is a massive storytelling repository of people who have told their stories. So Nikian.org is a place where there's a ton of stories, and anyone who wants to tell their story.
Can you spell that for me?
Sure, Nikean.org, and we'll get Cheryl to put that in the chat as well. And anyone can go there and record their story, and it's a really massive coming out place for people. Over to you, Greg.
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of storytelling. So Tatiana, thank you for calling that out. I've contributed my story to Nikian, and it's a wonderful organization. The way they conduct the interviews is just so professional, and the finished product was beautiful. And a lot of my friends in the communities that I'm in have contributed stories, and you know, that's what we need. And again, it's borderless, so it doesn't matter where you live. My telling my story here will help Washington, and someone telling their story in Idaho will help someone in India. I mean, people have to learn about this, and these stories, they touch our emotions. And a big part of the ad campaign here in Colorado was veterans telling their stories, because that's a very common constituency that pretty much anyone can get behind, with all the trauma they've suffered and the service that they've done for, you know, our country or your given country. So, and what I would say there, just as a bit of motivation, because it's a motivation that I needed, was to get out of your comfort zone and be vulnerable and be willing to tell your story. And that was hard for me in the beginning, because I was new to this, and to be able to stand up in front of a crowd, or, you know, on a podcast, or even in a call like this, and say, I've suffered from depression, childhood trauma. And I can say that now without feeling wonky about it, but it wasn't always that way. But if you believe in this work, then make it about something bigger than yourself, because it is. You know, challenge yourself and just say yes to everything. Volunteer, get out there. Like I said, I was never involved in advocacy work, but I found out about Natural Medicine Health Act. I went, signed up on the site, and then they got back in touch. They'd come to an event. I walked in, you know, kind of what's going on here, and like I was in. So, you know, just kind of like a challenge or an invitation, just volunteer, tell your story, get out there, talk to people, and things will start to flow. You'll just start to meet people and get invited to stuff, and then you'll feel more comfortable doing it, and then it just feeds on itself. And then, like I said, I'm a psychedelic baby, 14 months old, and here I am on this call, and honored to be here. So that's what I would encourage everyone to do.
Yeah, and I would kind of second what both of you have said, which is like, each individual voice is really important, and you're not alone. And so the more that we can be vulnerable and transparent, the more that other people can relate in that way. And that makes it easier for the story to spread and the momentum to spread. One of the silver linings of having to go through a campaign in our county is it brought all of the supporters together. And now we know all the businesses super well that want to open here in Deschutes County, and how we work together to make things happen. So yeah, I would say the grassroots piece is really important, and don't underestimate. Each of you listening is really, really valuable in this movement, because you're going to have your own town that you're listening from, and go host an educational event, and the people that come will help you, and then it just blossoms from that. What else do we need help with? One of my things Greg and I have been thinking about with the PVA is that there is the thriving middle ground. We're kind of renaming it from the underground to the middle ground. And there's so much wisdom with those folks that have been practicing with indigenous ways, some with clinical ways, and some coaches and what have you. So much wisdom. And it's really a shame that there isn't any sort of way to bring that wisdom into our facilitator programs. So that's something that our Psychedelic Business Association is hoping to do. And we'll roll out with some continuing education options for people who are licensed facilitators and who are not. And also to help that community kind of regulate, because it is underground and there is no third party service. Like clients can, oh yeah, my neighbor said this healer was really good. And yeah, they're a shaman. They went to Peru once or whatever, which is great. And there's no regulation in that world. And so I think for the whole psychedelic and entheogenic community there, I believe there needs to be some sort of safety standards put in place, which the North Star Alliance kind of helps do. And then finally, like that was my wishful thinking. And then there's like the Western colonizer mind, which says banking, insurance, and funding. So that's the awkward rub of folding those things in.
I'll just put a few more shout outs here to a few things, because the First Nations lineages in many cases have never been broken, right? And so, right, one of the things we did at the Vancouver Island University postgraduate certificate for psychedelic assisted therapy, long-winded, is right from the beginning. Indigenous knowledge keepers and Indigenous elders were right there at the very first seeds planted for training. And so being able to have that, both systems, First Nations way of knowing, Indigenous knowledge keepers guiding how Western medicine can weave together with that. So anyone creating programs or having programs, just plant the seed right at the beginning, and it's easier because it's much more fun. We bring it all together. The other thing too to help out is the Psychedelic Association of Canada has a coast to coast ethics working group that if you go on our site and you look on ethics and drop down, we've been working on documents like this for exactly that reason: how to find an ethical therapist, how to be an ethical therapist, a code of conduct. And we're not trying to recreate the wheel. What we're doing is we're taking the best of everything that's already out there and then co-creating something for our audience. And all people are welcome to take it, use it, modify it, add to it. And it's these sort of things where if we do it with the more people that are involved in these kind of documents, the less our blinders, right? The blinders widen and everyone can see like, oh, I never thought about that wording or how that may come across. And it's been absolutely a pleasure to work with my colleagues from across Canada, and actually even a few international folks that are now on the working group, jumping into the documents and making them better. So I offer that up as a gift to everyone, like go on the website and steal our stuff. That's what it's there for. Yeah. So where do you guys hope to be? Let's leave some inspiration here to our audience. And in 5 years, everything goes exactly as you hope. Where are you at in your state? What's happening in your country?
I can start just by really simply, anyone who wishes to receive this kind of treatment can afford it and has access to it. Anyone who wishes to serve in that capacity can afford to and can pass whatever means they need to. One of the criticisms of Measure 109 is that Maria Sabina would not be allowed to be a facilitator. So that's another piece of what we're trying to do with our business association is create a different criteria so that people with this Indigenous wisdom are supported and identified and can serve in that way if they choose.
Yeah, I'll echo off what you said, Piper. The equity piece is so incredibly important because that's we haven't really talked about that today. We're focused more on legalization, which is wonderful, but that doesn't mean that people can afford these treatments. A lot of people will not be able to afford these treatments because since they are federally illegal, healthcare does not cover it. And we're already finding with the PBA that just getting liability insurance for these treatment centers will be extremely expensive. So we need to be, I don't have the answer to it, but we need to be thinking about capitalism in a different way. I don't know if that will be solved in the next 5 years, but I think a lot of people are asking the right questions and thinking about different ways of compassionate capitalism and equity. But certainly, and there are a lot of nonprofits doing great work with fundraising, folks like Heroic Hearts sending, I think, over 400 veterans to the Amazon for ayahuasca ceremonies. So there's a lot of great work being done, but we just need more. We need more funding, more awareness, more donations, so that, as Piper said, no one is shut out of this, whether for a legal reason or a
I think I'd like to start with thanking the people who provided me access, who've provided us access, who wrote zines, books, podcasts, they threw festivals, they created psychedelic societies. Thank your sitters and your guides who held space for you with intention and in an ethical way and with integrity, even in the underground and in these unregulated spaces, and especially the people who sold you drugs. Thank them and protect them and continue to protect them, because these are still federally prohibited in our country. I think there's a lot of lessons to learn, and Piper was really touching on this, that we can adopt from the stewards of many of these earth-based medicines from around the world. And that these models of study are rooted in experiential learning. Support our psychedelic societies. That's where the vast majority of people I know found their way into this space. They got connected through someone who has had either their own personal experiences, or they learned about a psychedelic society and so they decided to show up because they're trying to, heal something in themselves. And my hopes are that broader access will come in a variety of flavors, from medical to personal access for you to trip at home alone in your bed. Like this, all of these ways are legitimate. And I believe in bodily autonomy and our right to explore our consciousness. And so my hope is that our psychedelic future is decentralized, it's transpersonal, it's held with integrity, and it's rooted in personal healing as much as it's rooted in magic and rituals of community cohesion. Those are my hopes. And thank you.
That is brilliant. I hope in 5 years psychedelics are super boring. That it is just like so mainstream that you can go out to your cabin and have a beautiful transpersonal, or you can have a completely medicalized option, and all of the options are on the table, and it's just boring. It just is.
Yeah. Yesterday, Piper texted me the card from the bank. It said psychedelic business on it because association wouldn't fit on the card. And our other co-founder said, "Oh, it's cool to walk into a bank and say, I'm here for psychedelic business." And we were like, ha, ha, ha. Like, well, it'd be cool as if in 5 years you walk in and say, "I'm here for psychedelic business." And that's not funny, right? It's like, here for psychedelic business. Yep. So boring.
Yep. My other wish is that everyone that's been incarcerated for use of a substance is out and expunged. Yes. No one should be in jail for use of a substance. No one should be in prison. No one should have their life impacted for using a substance. It's just completely asinine and just does not make any sense in a democratic society that you don't have the freedom of your body and the freedom of your consciousness.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that awareness back, Pam.
Need everyone out of jail as fast as possible and back to their families and their communities and their friends. So important that we not forget that portion of it, because there are still people that are incarcerated in places where the substance they're incarcerated for is now legal. So let's not forget anyone, and especially those that have been disproportionately impacted by these cultural and racist laws. So that's super, super important. We have to be super strong allies in that and use our privilege, any privilege we have to make sure that we amplify that a lot. Of course, I'm not telling you anything you didn't know, but just want to speak that into the air too. Absolutely a pleasure here. I think you guys probably answered everyone's questions on so, but I do want to give you all the last word on this. And before I do that, though, I just want to remind everyone that anyone that joined later, we do have the federal e-petition 4334 federal e-petition in Canada. If you're Canadian, please go there. Cheryl's put the link in the chat. The petition essentially is, if you qualify for medical assistance in dying, you clearly must have access to psilocybin first if you wish it. And where our goal is to get that out to 500,000 people, 500,000 signatures. So amplify it, please share it to all the Canadians you know. We need to really make a splash here. Thank you for that. Thank you, Cheryl, for all your work on this webinar. Thanks for all the volunteers that help us out here. Just love you all. You're all awesome. And I want to give you all the last word on anything you want to ask or say, and jump on in.
One of the questions that was in an email, Pam, was like, how can Canada and the United States work together? And I've sort of been thinking about that. And there's so many ways. I see more ways that we work together than we're doing things separately, like research projects. We already sort of share those from London and across the world. Banking and insurance, crossing borders there and offering that. Just the stories, the sharing of stories, and the ethics piece, I think is a big one. Like we all learn more how to be better people in this transition from bringing these beautiful medicines into our Western colonized world. So the more that we can learn from each other and bring it about in a safe way for all people to have access to, the more collaboration, the better. And so I invite any emails to come towards us, any ideas that are alive in you. And I look forward to more communication with the PAC in Canada.
I'm happy.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, you can go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, this just is kind of just embellishing a bit more about what I shared before, call out, invitation, encouragement to, and so much as what's come out of this call with all the work we're doing in our states and countries is we have to get out of our comfort zones, whether that's, dealing with rewording legislation or getting out and talking to folks who might be uneducated, or sharing our stories and being vulnerable. And when I think about that, getting out of my comfort zone, and that's something I'm working on in my healing, I think many of us are. I guess the invitation would be for those of you who've sat with whatever form of psychedelic medicine, those can be very uncomfortable situations, right? And we do them anyway. We come out the other side. And I would say that, I'll speak personally, but I think a lot of people would agree, sitting in a psychedelic ceremony is probably harder than calling one of your local politicians, or standing in front of 10 people and sharing your story, or getting on a podcast to share your story, or knocking on a door. We didn't really do door knocking in the campaign, but there's a lot of things that are hard, right? But those of us who've done medicine work, it's probably harder than those things. So just kind of, and I guess really what I'm saying is like, draw on your medicine work, which is all about getting out of your comfort zone to reach a higher level, and bring it into this work, which is like the grassroots, on the ground, hard stuff that we have to do, whether it's just like the grinding out of work, sharing a story, and just getting out there. So just kind of like bringing it full circle. So that's what I would share as a parting note.
I think what I would share is slow is smooth and smooth is fast. It's a motto I used to have when I was a wilderness guide working with teenagers, and they wanted to just get to camp, but just keeping a steady pace all day, and you'll be there before you know it. And I think that's something that I want to carry with me as I, lead and help hold like at least some of the legislative efforts that we're doing in Washington, is to like try to keep my energy steady, try not to get burned out. And some of the things that can really help is like for people to lean in, to come to engage with the process, again, to share our stories, and yeah, like to make psychedelics boring. That's such an awesome goal, to normalize them, to continue to have conversations, and yeah, I'm still hopeful. I still remain hopeful. So yeah, and also if anyone's going to the MAPS conference in June, I would love to meet you in person. I'll be there. So,
I will too. Come on out to Denver. It'll be awesome.
We're all going. And do we need to rebrand psychedelics? Do we need it? Is there too much stigma with that word?
Yeah,
Thanks for bringing this up.
interesting. I mean, I know that I wasn't part of naming the bill, the Natural Medicine Health Act, but I know that a lot of thought was put into that because it sounds pretty benign. It sounds boring, right? Natural medicine. So the word psychedelics is not in the bill. So I don't have the answer of whether it should be rebranded or not. What I will say is that just even compared to 5 years ago, let alone 10, 20, 40 years ago, the word psychedelics holds, a decreasing amount of negative stigma. I keep talking about make myself vulnerable. And sometimes I'll be on the fence. Should I tell this friend or a family member about what I'm doing? And every time I do, it's never backfired for me. That's a personal share. But so I don't have the golden answer, but I think maybe, I don't know, we're now back in the golden age of psychedelics. Let's lean into it and draw on the successes we've had and the positive movement. So I say we keep it.
Yeah, I'm in that camp too. I feel pretty strongly about reclaiming the word. There's so many things that are natural medicines that aren't psychedelic. So I think it's a little more specific, which is helpful as well. But yeah, I lean towards just embracing it.
I think that my idea was to basically create like the natural medicine health. It's sort of slides under the radar, and I hear and appreciate the history of the word psychedelic and honoring that and the people that came before. And we're still working in this colonized world with banks that like, it took me many, many days to get a bank account called the Psychedelic Business Association. And I had to go all the way up to the vice president. So there's some things that still working in this colonized world that might make it easier. And not to forget the lessons learned from our history.
I want to thank you all for taking some time out of your precious busy days to come and chat with us about what's happening in the US around all your campaigns. Thank you for inspiring other folks in the US and around cities all around North America to get going, get her done, and let's make psychedelics boring again. Again, thank you, Tatiana Luz from Washington, Decrim work and legislative work, and Greg Shankin from Colorado, and Piper Lucas from Oregon. I just want to thank you all so much. Cheryl's put your contact information in the chat at least once, so people can reach out to you guys. And next time, let's have 20 people from the US on this screen talking about how they brought these medicines to their state.
Yeah.
Have a great evening, everyone.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Pam.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Until next time.
Cheers.
All right. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.